The council chamber was filled with beings from 200 different worlds, and Daniel Carter stood at the human podium like he had done so many times before, his hands resting on the smooth surface as he prepared to speak once more about things that would never change. The chamber smelled of recycled air and alien biology, and the lights overhead cast everything in a cold blue glow that made even hope look dim and tired. Ambassador Carter had been doing this job for 12 years now, and his father had done it before him for 15 years, and his grandfather had started the whole thing when humanity first joined the Galactic Council 63 years ago, and in all that time, nothing had really changed for the better. They asked and were denied. They contributed and were ignored. They followed every rule and were still treated like children who did not understand how the galaxy really worked. Council Speaker Vothran sat in the highest chair looking down at everyone else with his insect eyes that never seemed to blink, and his mandibles clicked together in that way that meant he was already bored before Daniel even started talking. And next to him sat Councilor Zarathi, whose body was made of living crystal that reflected light in rainbow patterns, and she always voted no on everything humans proposed and had done so for decades. Without fail, Daniel cleared his throat and began speaking the words he had memorized because he had said them so many times that they were burned into his memory like scars. And he talked about the defense proposal again and how humanity had developed new shield technology that could protect colonies better than anything the Council currently used, and how they wanted to share this technology and work together on making everyone safer. Vothran did not even wait for Daniel to finish before he interrupted with that clicking sound his mouth parts made when he was dismissing something as worthless. And he said, the proposal was denied because humans were too young and too inexperienced to participate in military matters, and that humanity should submit their technology for review by the older, more established species who would decide what to do with it. Kate Morrison stood beside Daniel as his assistant and military liaison, and he could see her jaw muscles tighten the way they always did when this happened, and she was younger than him by 10 years and had more fire in her belly and less patience for the endless cycle of rejection and dismissal that defined human interaction with the Council. Daniel kept his voice calm and moved to the next item, which was the 30-second request for an investigation into the attack on New Vancouver Colony, where 300 human civilians had died when raiders attacked, and the evidence clearly showed that some council members had supplied the raiders with weapons and coordinates and maps of the colony defenses. But every time humanity brought this up, the council said the evidence was not good enough, or that it was a misunderstanding, or that humans should not have colonized that area. Anyway, Councilor Drethran, who was built like a mountain of muscle and scales and bad attitude, leaned forward and said that humans needed to learn that actions had consequences, and that if they colonized disputed territory, then they should expect problems. And when Kate tried to point out that the territory was listed as unclaimed in all official council records, Drethran just laughed, that deep rumbling laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. Vothran declared the petition denied and said that humanity was very good at following rules, but perhaps in another century or two they would understand that some rules only applied to certain species, and the way he said it made it clear that humanity was not one of the species who got exceptions or special treatment or any real voice in how things worked. The other council members made sounds that their species used for laughing, and the translator system struggled to convert all the different clicks and hums and whistles into something Daniel could understand. But he did not need translation to know they were mocking him and mocking humanity and mocking the idea that humans deserve to be treated as equals. Daniel gathered his papers and his dignity and walked out of the chamber with Kate beside him, and neither of them spoke until they were in the hallway where other species pushed past them without apology or acknowledgement. And Kate finally said how much longer did they have to endure this treatment and being made to feel small and worthless. He looked back at the council chamber doors that were already closing and sealing shut, and he said not much longer, because this had been the last time humanity would ask for permission or beg for fair treatment or pretend that the council saw them as anything other than useful tools who should be grateful for the chance to contribute and then shut up. What the council did not know and had never bothered to investigate because they assumed humans were too simple and naive to hide anything important was that this had been a formality and a final courtesy and a last chance that the council had already wasted, and Admiral Gregory Hayes was at that very moment giving orders that had been planned for 20 years. Project Exodus had been hidden in plain sight disguised as commercial expansion and trade. Route development and every human colony had been preparing, and every human ship had been modified, and every human station had supplies stockpiled, and in 72 hours there would be no human presence left in council space for them to dismiss, or exploit or ignore. The evacuation fleet had been built over 2 decades, with every commercial vessel that left human space being slightly larger than the official records showed, and every cargo shipment containing materials listed as simple trade goods, but actually being components and supplies and everything needed to build a new civilization. Far from the council and its endless bureaucracy and casual cruelty, Daniel walked through the embassy for the last time, looking at the walls, where portraits of his father and grandfather hung, and where records of 63 years of human diplomatic efforts were stored, and all of it would be erased and removed, and taken with them when they left, because humanity would leave nothing behind for the council to claim or study or use. Kate asked him if he thought the council would even notice at first, and Daniel smiled because he knew they would not. And the council was so used to ignoring humanity that it would probably take them days to realize that every human embassy had closed and every human trade post had been abandoned, and every human researcher had packed up and gone home. In his office, Daniel recorded the final message that would be left playing on loop when the council finally bothered to check on their human servants, and he spoke clearly and calmly and told them that humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council effective immediately, and that all agreements were void and all collaborations were ended, and that the council should not attempt to contact humanity or send delegations or expect anything from humans ever again. He explained that humanity had come in peace and offered friendship and sought partnership, but had instead received condescension and exploitation and dismissal, and that they had learned their lesson about what this council valued and who it considered worthy, and humans had decided their place was not here, serving beings who would never see them as equals. The message ended with a simple statement that Daniel had been wanting to say for 12 years, and his father had wanted to say for 15, and his grandfather had probably wanted to say from the very beginning, and it was just 4 words that felt like freedom, and those words were, "Do not follow us." Admiral Hayes sent the signal, and across 200 worlds and 50 stations and 100 outposts, every human began moving with practiced efficiency, and within 48 hours humanity had vanished from council space like they had never been there at all, except for the empty buildings and the terminated contracts and the abandoned facilities that nobody else knew how to operate. The council would wake up soon and find that the servants had left and taken all their knowledge and skills and innovation with them, and humanity would be gone into the unexplored regions of space where no council rules applied and where they could build something better than what they were leaving behind. Council Speaker Vothran was reviewing his morning reports when the first message arrived about humans closing their embassy on the Zelnari homeworld, and he barely looked up from his reading because species were always rotating their diplomatic staff and moving personnel around, and there was nothing unusual about an embassy updating its roster or downsizing its operations. His assistant brought him his usual morning beverage, which tasted like copper and smelled like flowers, and Vothran drank it while scanning through the daily briefings about trade disputes and territorial claims, and the 1,000 small problems that came with governing 200 worlds, and their billions of citizens who all wanted something different. The second message arrived an hour later, and this one made him pause because it was not just one embassy, but 5 human embassies across 5 different worlds, all closing on the same day, and all with the same brief explanation about personnel reassignment and diplomatic restructuring, and that seemed odd, but still not particularly alarming. Then Counselor Zarathi came into his office without waiting for permission, and her crystal body was pulsing with colors that indicated agitation and confusion, and she demanded to know what the humans were doing because all 23 human research teams on her homeworld had packed their equipment and left overnight and taken everything with them, including data files and research notes and even the furniture from their laboratories. Vothran set down his beverage and pulled up the broader communications network and started searching for reports about human activity, and what he found made his mandibles stop clicking and his eyes focus in a way they had not needed to for many years. Because the reports were coming in from everywhere at once. Every human embassy in council space had been evacuated and the buildings left empty except for automated systems playing recorded messages and Every human trade delegation had terminated their contracts and departed, and every human commercial facility had been stripped of equipment and personnel and closed down. The human research stations that had been studying everything from agriculture to medicine to physics were abandoned and the scientists gone and all their work either taken with them or deleted from local systems, and the human trade posts that had facilitated commerce between dozens of species were shut down with no forwarding. Information Vothran activated the emergency council session protocols, and within an hour, the chamber was filled with confused and angry counselors, all demanding explanations, and all receiving the same answer, which was that nobody knew where the humans had gone or why they had left or how they had coordinated such a massive evacuation without anyone noticing. Counselor Drethran slammed his massive fist on the table and said this was unacceptable, and that humans could not just leave without permission, and that someone should send ships to bring them back and make them explain themselves, and Vothran almost agreed before he remembered that humans had not actually broken any laws by leaving, and the council had no authority to force them to stay. The intelligence director was a nervous creature named Shenra, whose species flickered in and out of visibility when stressed, and right now he was barely visible at all, as he explained that the human evacuation had been planned for years and hidden within normal commercial and diplomatic traffic. Every human commercial vessel that had left their space over the past decade had been slightly larger than the official manifest indicated, and every cargo shipment had included materials that were listed as trade goods but were actually components for ships and stations and habitats. And the humans had been building their evacuation fleet while everyone assumed they were just expanding their business operations. Xerathi demanded to know where they had gone, and Shenra pulled up tracking data that showed the last known human trajectories, all heading in the same direction, which was spinward, toward the unexplored regions of space that the council had never bothered to survey because there were no valuable resources there, and no strategic importance. Someone asked if the humans had left any explanation, and Vothran remembered the message his assistant had mentioned, and he pulled it up and played it for the entire council. And they all watched Daniel Carter standing in civilian clothes, looking more relaxed than he had ever looked in all his years of service. The message was simple and direct, and it said that humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council effective immediately, and that all previous agreements were void, and all collaborative projects were ended, and that the council should not attempt to contact them, or follow them, or expect anything from them ever again. Carter explained that humanity had come seeking partnership and had received exploitation, and that they had offered friendship and received dismissal, and that for 63 years they had been treated not as equals or even as promising juniors, but as useful servants who should be grateful for the opportunity to contribute and then be quiet. The way Carter said it made it sound like he was not angry or upset, but just tired and done with trying and ready to move on to something better. And the message ended with a warning not to look for them because they would not be welcoming if anyone came. The council chamber was silent after the message ended, and Vothran looked around at faces that were showing emotions ranging from confusion to anger to something that might have been concern. And Drethran broke the silence by saying this was ridiculous and that humans could not survive on their own and would come crawling back within a year. But more reports kept coming in, and each one was more disturbing than the last because it was not just that humans had left, but that they had been thorough about it and had taken everything of value and destroyed what they could not carry. New Vancouver Colony, which had been attacked by raiders and which the council had refused to investigate, was gone and not destroyed but deliberately dismantled, and every building taken apart and every resource extracted and every piece of technology removed. And the Arathi scouts who went to claim the territory found nothing but empty foundations and scorched earth. The human agricultural worlds that had been feeding dozens of council species were abandoned with crops left to rot in the fields and facilities powered down and populations evacuated. And the food shortage projections were already showing problems within 6 months. Every human station and outpost and settlement in council space or near it was empty, and the pattern was always the same, which was that anything valuable had been taken and anything that could not be moved had been destroyed or rendered useless, and humans had left nothing behind that the council could use or study or benefit from. Vothran asked how they had missed an operation of this scale, and Shenra explained that humans had hidden it in plain sight by making everything look like normal expansion and growth, and the Council Intelligence Services had never thought to look closer, because humans were too young and too naive to be deceptive. The economic reports started coming in next, and they showed that human contributions to Council prosperity had been far larger than anyone had realized, and the loss of their agricultural techniques would cause food shortages, and the loss of their medical innovations would increase mortality rates, and the loss of their trade route optimizations would decrease efficiency across the entire Council economy. Xerathi said they should send a delegation to negotiate and offer better terms, and Vothran almost laughed because it was exactly the kind of thinking that had driven humans away in the first place, and the assumption that humans would want to come back if only the Council offered slightly better conditions. He looked at the star charts showing the direction humans had gone, and he thought about 63 years of dismissing their contributions and denying their petitions and treating them like children, and he wondered if maybe they had been the children all along for not recognizing what they had. Drethran was still insisting that humans would fail and return, but Vothran was not so sure anymore because he had seen the look in Daniel Carter's eyes in that final message, and that was not the look of someone who planned to come back begging, and it was not the look of someone who had given up, but rather the look of someone who had finally decided to stop trying to fix something that did not want to be fixed. The council session ended with no decisions made and no actions taken because nobody knew what to do about a species that had simply chosen to leave. And Vothran sat alone in the chamber, after everyone else had gone, and thought about all the times humans had asked for help, or offered ideas, or requested fair treatment, and how the council had responded every single time with some version of no 6 months would pass before the council truly understood what they had lost, and by then it would be far too late to get it back. 6 months after humanity vanished from council space, the economic director stood before an emergency session and delivered news that made even the oldest counselors shift uncomfortably in their seats. And Thelmos was normally a calm being who dealt with numbers and projections without emotion. But today his voice carried an edge of something that might have been fear. The Agricultural Consortium was reporting a 30% drop in food production across 17 worlds, and the reason was simple, which was that human hydroponic techniques had been increasing yields for the past 40 years, and without human involvement or access to their methods, the production had collapsed back to pre-human levels, and nobody knew how to fix it. Counselor Xerathi insisted that they still had the facilities that humans had built, and that surely the council scientists could figure out how to maintain them, and Thelmos pulled up screen after screen of failing systems, and corrupted data, and equipment that was breaking down, because nobody understood the maintenance protocols well enough to keep things running. The problem was not just having the technology, but understanding how it worked, and why humans had designed it the way they did, and what innovations they had made that seemed simple but were actually incredibly sophisticated. And without humans there to explain and teach and troubleshoot, the whole system was falling apart, piece by piece. Vothran asked how this was possible, given that humans had been sharing their knowledge for 63 years, and surely in that time, the council had learned enough to continue without them. And Thelmos said that was exactly the problem, because the council had learned to use what humans gave them, but had never learned to truly understand it or replicate the creative thinking behind it. The medical facilities across dozens of worlds were reporting equipment failures and treatment protocols that were not working as well as they used to, and the Zelnari childhood mortality rate had increased by 40% since the humans left, because nobody fully understood how to maintain or repair the diagnostic machines that humans had designed. Trade routes that had been optimized by human AI systems were becoming inefficient as the programs degraded without proper maintenance, and nobody had bothered to learn how the optimization algorithms actually worked, because it had seemed unnecessary when humans were always available to handle technical problems. Defense satellites around council worlds were going dark one by one as systems failed, and the technicians who tried to repair them discovered that human engineering was more complex than it appeared, and that what looked like simple solutions were actually elegant designs that required deep understanding to maintain. Drethran slammed his fist down and declared this was sabotage, and that humans had deliberately made the council dependent on them and then abandoned Everyone out of spite, and Shenra, the intelligence director, flickered into visibility, just long enough to say that analysis suggested otherwise. The humans had simply done exactly what the Council had asked, which was to contribute to Council initiatives, and share their knowledge and help improve systems across multiple sectors, and they had done so enthusiastically and competently, and the Council had accepted all of it while refusing to give humans any real authority or recognition. Nobody had asked whether the Council understood human contributions well enough to maintain them independently, because that question seemed unnecessary for such a young species, and the assumption had always been that human knowledge was simple and easy to replicate, and that any Council scientist could figure it out if they bothered to try. But now they were trying and discovering that human innovation was far more sophisticated than anyone had given them credit for, and that the casual genius humans brought to problem-solving had become woven into Council infrastructure so deeply that removing it was causing everything to slowly unravel. Zarathi asked about reclaiming the territories that humans had abandoned, and surely those resources could help offset some of the economic losses, and military coordinator Vaxil, who was a veteran of a dozen wars, shook his head and said they had tried and found nothing worth taking. The Orathi had moved on New Vancouver immediately after humans left because they wanted to claim the colony for themselves, and they found a world that had been stripped of everything valuable, and every structure dismantled down to the foundation, and every resource extracted, and every piece of technology either taken or destroyed beyond repair. 47 other worlds showed the same pattern, and human stations and trade posts were similarly empty, and anything the Council could have used was gone, and anything humans could not carry had been rendered worthless, and they had left nothing behind but empty buildings and scorched ground. Vothran remembered the message Daniel Carter had left, and the tone in his voice that had seemed so calm and final, and he realized now that humans had not left in anger or spite, but with methodical planning and absolute commitment to cutting all ties and making sure the Council gained nothing from their departure. The economic projections showed that at current rates the Council would lose 40% of infrastructure improvements within 5 years, and the humanitarian cost would be measured in billions of lives affected by reduced medical care and food shortages and decreased security, and all of it traceable back to the loss of human contributions. Someone asked what humans had wanted and why they had never indicated they were unhappy, and Shenra pulled up recordings of Council sessions stretching back decades and showed frame after frame of human ambassadors making requests that were denied and offering ideas that were dismissed and reporting attacks that were ignored. Ambassador Carter appeared again and again over 12 years, and his father before him and his grandfather before that. And the pattern was always the same, which was humans asking for fair treatment and the Council responding with condescension and exploitation, and casual dismissal. Zarathi said that humans had seemed content with the arrangement, and Shenra said no, they had seemed patient, and there was a difference. And the Council had mistaken their patience for acceptance and their optimism for naivety and their generosity for weakness. The truth was that humans had been testing the Council for 63 years and giving them chance after chance to treat humanity as partners instead of servants, and the Council had failed that test every single time. And eventually humans had stopped testing and started planning. Drethrin insisted they should send ships to find humans and bring them back and make them fix the problems they had created, and the way he said it made Vothran realize that some counselors still did not understand what had happened, or why humans would never respond to demands. Vothran said they could send a delegation to negotiate, but it would have to be an offer of genuine partnership with real concessions and equal authority, and Zarathi asked what they should offer, and he said everything humans had asked for over the past 63 years, and had been denied. But even as he said it, Vothran wondered if it would be enough, because the Council was offering now what humans had requested a year ago, and what they would have been grateful for 5 years ago, and what they had desperately needed 10 years ago, and the timing mattered. A young species asking for help and being denied learned very different lessons than an established species being courted for their expertise, and humans had spent their formative years in the galactic community being taught that their contributions were expected, but their opinions were worthless. The session ended with authorization for a diplomatic mission to find humanity and negotiate their return, and Zerathi volunteered to lead it personally because she had been one of the primary voices dismissing human petitions, and perhaps she understood better than others what needed to be acknowledged and apologized for. 3 ships left Council space a week later, heading spinward following the trajectory humans had taken, and carrying gifts and concessions and offers of better terms, and everyone hoped it would be enough to convince humanity to return. But Vothran stood in his office alone, watching the ships depart, and remembered the look in Daniel Carter's eyes in that final message, and he had a sinking feeling that the Council was about to discover just how completely they had misjudged humanity and how permanent their departure really was. The economic reports kept coming, and each one was worse than the last, and systems that humans had touched were failing across Council space, and the Council was discovering too late that humanity had not been dependent on them, but rather they had been dependent on humanity. And now humanity was gone, and the Council was left trying to maintain a civilization that had been built partially on human innovation and human generosity and human patience, and all of those things had left with them. The Council diplomatic fleet emerged from jump space into a region of the galaxy that had never been surveyed, and Councilor Zerathi stood on the bridge of the lead ship, wondering what they would find and whether humanity would even agree to talk. After everything that had happened, they had been traveling for 3 weeks following the trajectory humans had taken, and finding nothing but empty systems and dead rocks, and no signs of human settlements or ships, or any indication that anyone had passed through this region at all. Drethran had insisted on coming along, despite Vothran advising against it, and he stood near the weapons console looking irritated that the mission was taking so long and muttering about how humans were probably hiding in some backwater system, barely surviving and ready to beg for help. The chief engineer was monitoring the sensors and suddenly called out that they were detecting massive gravimetric distortions ahead, and something very large was affecting local space and time in ways that suggested artificial construction on a scale the Council had never seen. Zerathi ordered the fleet to drop out of faster-than-light travel, and they emerged into normal space, and everyone on the bridge froze because what they were seeing should not have been possible. A ring structure encircled an entire star system, and it was so massive that Council engineering could not have built it in centuries, and it would have required multiple species working together, with resources from dozens of worlds, and yet here it was, gleaming in the light of the local sun. The chief engineer was stammering about how long it would take to build something like that, and he said with Council technology, it would take hundreds of years and require coordination between multiple species and massive resource investment, and even then the engineering challenges would be nearly impossible to solve. Zerathi asked how long humans had been gone, and someone said 1 year, and everyone on the bridge understood the implication, which was that either humans had built this impossibly quickly, or they had been working on it for far longer than anyone realized, and had hidden the entire project while still maintaining their presence in Council space. The scans showed that the ring was not just a structure but a complete habitat, with shipyards and manufacturing facilities and defensive systems and power generation on a scale that dwarfed anything the Council operated, and there were dozens of ships moving around it and multiple stations and energy signatures indicating hundreds of thousands of people living and working. Drethran said this was impossible, and that humans did not have this kind of technology or capability, and they must have stolen it or been given it by someone else, and the chief engineer pointed out that the design was distinctly human, with aesthetic choices and engineering solutions that matched human preferences and problem-solving approaches. An communications officer reported that they were being hailed, and it was audio only, and Admiral Gregory Hayes' voice filled the bridge, sounding calm and professional, and completely unbothered by the arrival of a Council fleet in what he called human sovereign space. Zerathi drew herself up and used her most formal diplomatic voice to explain that she was Councilor Zerathi, and that the fleet had come seeking dialogue about humanity returning to the Galactic Council under improved terms and better conditions. There was a long pause, and then Hayes said something that might have been a laugh, and he said that humanity was not interested in returning to the Council and that they were content where they were. Zerathi pushed forward and said that surely humans needed trade and diplomatic contact and mutual defense agreements, and Hayes interrupted and said they did need those things, and they had them because humanity had established contact with 17 species beyond Council space, The species were mostly young ones who were still finding their way in the galaxy, and who had been dismissed or exploited by the Council just like humanity had been. And together they were building something new based on partnership rather than hierarchy, and mutual respect rather than age-based authority. Sarathi felt her crystal structure pulse with frustration, and she said that humans could not simply abandon galactic civilization because their feelings had been hurt. And Hayes' voice took on an edge, and he said this was not about hurt feelings. He reminded her that the Council had allowed attacks on human civilians and stolen human innovations and dismissed human contributions while relying on them, and that this was not emotional sensitivity, but a fundamental incompatibility of values. Sarathi tried again and said, the Council could change and could offer better terms and full voting rights and seats on the Security Council, and all the things that humans had requested over the years. And Hayes was quiet for a moment before responding. He said that the Council was offering now what humans had requested a year ago, and what they would have been grateful for 5 years ago, and what they desperately needed 10 years ago. And the timing of the offer said everything about Council priorities. Humans had built something better in the years since leaving, and they did not need Council permission anymore, and they did not need Council approval, and they did not need the Council at all. The channel went silent, and Sarathi tried to continue, but Hayes cut her off and said that the Council fleet was in human sovereign space and had 1 hour to leave before being escorted out, and any Council vessel that entered this region again would be considered hostile. The transmission ended and the bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship systems and the soft beeping of sensors that were still trying to analyze the impossible structure that humans had built. Sarathi stared at the ring and at the ships moving around it and at the clear evidence that humanity had not fled into the unknown to hide but had come here to build and to thrive and to create something that the Council had refused to let them create within. Its boundaries Drethran demanded they stay and force a proper negotiation, and maybe even take some of the human technology by force if necessary. And the military advisor went pale and pointed out that the defensive systems on that ring could probably destroy the entire Council fleet without much effort. The scans were showing weapons emplacements and shield generators and power sources that suggested humans had not just advanced their civilian technology, but had also developed military capabilities, far beyond what they had shown the Council. Sarathi thought about all the times humans had requested participation in defense initiatives and been denied, and all the technology they had offered to share and been told to submit for review. And she realized that humans had been holding back and had been far more capable than they had ever let the Council see. She ordered the fleet to withdraw because there was no point in staying and no leverage to use and no way to force humanity to return. And as they prepared to jump back to Council space, she looked one more time at the massive ring and wondered how badly the Council had miscalculated. The chief engineer was still studying the scans, and he said quietly that humans had always been this capable, and they had just stopped asking permission to show it, and everyone on the bridge knew he was right. The fleet jumped away and began the long journey back to Council space, and Sarathi prepared her report, knowing that it would shatter whatever illusions the Council still held about humanity eventually returning. She would have to tell them that humans had not just survived, but had thrived, and that they had built something that rivaled the Council in scale and surpassed it in innovation, and that they had done it in 1 year with none of the resources or support that Council species took for granted. More importantly, she would have to tell them that humanity had formed an alliance with 17 other species, and that those species had chosen to join humans rather than stay with the Council, and that the partnership was growing. The Council had not just lost humanity, but had lost the future that humanity represented. And now there were 2 powers in the galaxy, and one was built on hierarchy and tradition, and the other was built on equality and innovation. Sarathi looked at the data one more time and understood that the Council had made a mistake that could not be fixed with better offers or diplomatic negotiations because humans did not want anything from the Council anymore. They had wanted partnership and been given servitude, and they had wanted respect and been given dismissal, and they had wanted fairness and been given exploitation. And now they had built their own civilization where those things were foundational rather than negotiable. The Council would have to change or fade into irrelevance, and Sarathi was not sure which was more likely. 5 years after humanity left the Galactic Council, Vothran stood before the assembled chamber and delivered a report that would change galactic politics forever, and his voice was different now, without the casual superiority that had once characterized every word he spoke. The human withdrawal had cost the Council 37% of economic growth and medical advances that had saved an estimated 2 billion lives every year, and agricultural techniques that had prevented famine across the border regions, and the strategic consequences were even worse than the economic ones. He activated the display and showed a map of known space, and the Council territory was marked in blue, covering hundreds of systems in a sprawling network that had taken thousands of years to build, but now there was a new region marked in green, and it was human sovereign space, and it was growing. Humanity had formed what they called the Partnership Accord, and 17 species had joined them, and most of those species were young or had been previously dismissed by the Council as unimportant, and together they were sharing technology freely and operating on principles of equal participation and mutual benefit. Their combined economic output now rivaled the Council, and their technological advancement rate exceeded Council innovation by significant margins, and every analysis showed that the gap would only widen as more species joined the partnership. Drethran tried to interrupt and say that humans could not sustain that growth because they lacked Council experience and institutional knowledge. But Vothran cut him off and said that humans had something the Council lacked, which was motivation and unity of purpose. Every species in the partnership had been dismissed or exploited by someone in the Council chamber, and humanity had not just left, but had created an alternative that was proving more attractive than what the Council offered, and that was the real threat. Intelligence reports showed that several current Council members were considering defection to the partnership, and the Velkari had opened preliminary talks, and the Ithran delegation had requested partnership observers, and the Council was losing not just humanity but the future they represented. Xerathi asked if they should simply accept this and allow upstart species to fragment galactic civilization, and Shenra said quietly that they had already done exactly that every time they dismissed human contributions and denied their petitions and treated them as servants. Vothran said he had reviewed every interaction the Council had with humanity over 63 years, and with 5 years of hindsight, he could see what they had all missed. At the time, humans had not been naive but optimistic, and they had not been weak but patient, and they had not been dependent but generous, and the Council had mistaken all of it for inferiority. Thelmos added that the Council had assumed that because humans were young, they had nothing to teach, and that because they asked for help they had nothing to offer, and the Council had been catastrophically wrong about all of it. The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence because everyone present had voted to deny human petitions or had benefited from human contributions without giving credit, or had dismissed human concerns as unimportant. Someone asked what the Council should do now, and Vothran looked at the star map showing the partnership region expanding in all the projections, and he said they had to adapt and reform and examine every assumption about hierarchy and worth, and whether age equaled wisdom. They needed to reach out to species they had dismissed and offer genuine partnership instead of lip service, and they needed to become what they should have been when humanity first arrived, which was a true council of equals rather than a bureaucracy of established powers. Gatekeeping against newcomers, Xerathi asked what would happen if the council could not change, and Vothran said then they would fade into irrelevance while humanity and their partners built the future that the council had refused to share. The debate went on for hours, and some counselors argued for military action and others argued for economic pressure, and still others argued for simply waiting, because surely the partnership would collapse under its own inexperience. But Vothran kept bringing them back to the central question, which was why species were choosing to join humanity instead of staying with or joining the council, and the answer was always the same, which was that the partnership offered what the council had failed to provide: equal voice regardless of age and mutual respect, regardless of technological level, and shared prosperity based on contribution rather than seniority, and every species that joined the partnership was making a statement about what they valued and what they would no longer tolerate. The council passed a series of reforms that day, and they were weak compromises that barely addressed the fundamental problems. but it was more change than the Council had implemented in centuries, and Vothran knew it was too little and too late. But perhaps it was a start. Meanwhile, far beyond Council territory in a system that had been empty and worthless until humans arrived, Daniel Carter stood on an observation deck, watching ships from 18 species now dock and depart in peaceful coordination. Kate Morrison approached with a datapad and reported that the Velkari had formally requested partnership membership and that the Council was in crisis mode, trying to prevent more defections. Daniel smiled slightly and said to send the Velkari the standard welcome package, which included the list of partnership principles about equal voice and mutual respect and shared prosperity. And if they accepted those terms genuinely, then they were welcome. Kate asked if he thought the Council would ever change. And Daniel watched, a human transport dock next to a Velkari science vessel, and saw the crews already mixing and working together in ways that would never have been allowed in Council space. He said some counselors would change, and others would cling to old hierarchies, until their civilization crumbled, and either way it was not humanity's problem anymore, because they had tried to change the Council from within and been refused. The partnership had proven that another way was possible, and now species across the galaxy were seeing that proof and making their own choices about what kind of galactic community they wanted to be part of. Kate asked if Daniel thought humanity would ever reconcile with the Council, and he considered the question carefully before answering. He said perhaps if the Council truly changed and truly understood what they had lost and why they had lost it, then maybe there could be dialogue, but it would have to be between equals, and the Council would have to prove they understood that concept. The partnership was not built on spite or revenge, but on the simple idea that every species deserved respect and every contribution deserved recognition, and every voice deserved to be heard, regardless of how long that species had been traveling. The star's humans had offered that to the Council and been rejected, and so they had built it themselves, and now they were sharing it with others who had similar experiences and similar hopes for something better. On the Council homeworld, Vothran sat alone in his office looking at the final message Daniel Carter had left and understanding now what he should have understood. 5 years ago, humanity had not failed the Council, but the Council had failed humanity, and in doing so they had failed themselves, and the question now was whether they could change before the galaxy moved on without them. The future belonged to those willing to share it equally, and humanity had learned that lesson and had built a civilization on that foundation, and the Council was discovering too late that age and tradition meant nothing without wisdom and flexibility. Vothran pulled up the reforms the Council had passed and knew they were inadequate, but hoped they were enough to start the real work of transformation. Young species were watching and evaluating and making choices about their future, and the Council had one chance to prove they could be worthy of trust and partnership. Whether they would take that chance or cling to old ways until irrelevance claimed them remained to be seen. But the galaxy was changing with or without Council approval, and that perhaps was the final lesson humanity had taught by leaving, which was that no institution was permanent and no authority was unquestionable, and every civilization had to earn its place through actions rather than assume it through age. Daniel stood at the observation window and looked out at the partnership growing and thriving and becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, and he felt no regret about leaving, only hope for what they were building together.